Hi, this is Kirsten Was answering my self-reflective and reflection responses. First question, to what extent do you believe all children and youth learn successfully when informed and caring educators assist them and make sufficient resources available to them? Well, first off, I believe that students learn successfully when educators begin with a sincere, deliberate commitment to the belief that all students can meet high academics when sufficient resources are available. With regards to my belief that all students can learn, what I mean by that is all students can progress in all subjects, or perhaps all kids can progress more in one subject or another, but all students have that potential to learn. Can they learn at the same rate, same speed? No, definitely not. It's all about having the children being able to progress and meet their educational needs. So there you go, first question. Question 2. To what extent do you ensure children are well educated and successful learners? Well, I believe that good instruction is something that follows content standards. You're always looking at the questions based off of whatever that standard is saying that students need to learn. Definitely you have to look at the strengths and the challenges that students have. And when it comes to that good instruction, it's all about doing the formative assessment, doing those quick checks, and then when you need to intervene, you intervene. That's when students are not getting, or when they are getting it, you advance to that next little bump, that next level. Question 3. To what extent you create both an educational environment and learning experiences for students that honor and respect who they are? Well, as an educator, it is important to create a learning environment that respects all learners, creating ideal conditions that values everyone, honors and respects each and every person in that learning environment. The optimal climate for learning is one that generates an atmosphere of trust. It's all about building trust within each other, making sure that within your classroom, for me, it was always a family unit. We created family. And when it comes to family, you don't have to like everyone in your family, but it's all about respecting each and every person in your family unit, i.e. your classroom. Question 4. To what extent do you ask yourself uncomfortable questions about racism, cultural preferences, and insufficient learning conditions and resources that are obstacles to learning for many students? This is an ongoing issue for me in terms of looking at the school that I currently am working with. This has been a school that I've been involved with for the past 8 years. Our school definitely is one that services, well, first of all, the most severe behavior problems, but then in addition to that, 90%, or it's actually 92% of the population in our school are considered from low-income families, and then they also are predominantly black students in our school. So in terms of continuing to ask myself questions about racism, culture preferences, those are the things that I look at inside of my learning environment, or when I was an educator with my own classroom, looking to my learners, seeing not just the student that's sitting in the seat in front of me as a learner, but really looking at them as a person, trying to figure out about their culture, about their background. I think that's one of those questions you have to ask always, and it doesn't matter if it's in the setting of a school. It's just one of those ongoing things that you need to ask yourself when you are out in the world. So question 5. To what extent do you ask questions about racism, cultural preferences, and insufficient learning conditions and resources that are obstacles for others in your district or your school? Well, the past 3 years I've been an instructional coach in my district, placed at the same school in which I taught. This is definitely one of those things that I constantly bring up in district meetings with other coaches, just in terms of the insufficient learning conditions. Here at Bridges Learning Center, being the school for the most severe behaviors for K to 8, you need to have ideal learning conditions for learners to learn. So that's one of the things that we constantly look at is what can we do, or how can we set a classroom environment that is conducive for learners. And one of the big things is within our school, we do have areas where students can be taken, we call them support room areas, where they have a chance to cool off a little bit, get themselves back in check so they can be back in that learning environment. Definitely there are times when there are insufficient learning conditions, just dealing with the extreme behaviors, and sometimes it's the insufficient schooling of some of the people that are inside of those learning classrooms. So that's one of the things that we constantly have to look at is, are we addressing the needs of the students? But in terms of racism and cultural preferences within my school and then with any of the district meetings that I've attended with other fellow instructional coaches, that's not one of the things that's on our radar, and those are conversations that we typically do not have. Number 6, question 6. To what extent do you engage in practices and policies that align with the beliefs that all students benefit from educational practices that engage them in learning about their cultural heritage and understanding their cultural background? Well, it's very similar to question 5 in terms of that's rarely a conversation that would occur within my classroom. The majority of my time with my students was always focusing more on their behavior needs and how to become better learners, how to deal with specific behavior issues, interventions in terms of the behavior needs. In terms of the cultural and their cultural background, definitely that's not something that I did. And if I did, it was a rarely occurrence that would happen in my classroom. Question number 7. To what extent do you engage in facilitating dialogue regarding the influence of cultural understanding and historic distrust that can result in cultural discomfort and disagreements? Once again, that's a rarely occurrence here. That's not a conversation that I typically bring up with people. 9 times out of 10, it's more, like I said, it's more the behavior issues that we typically are addressing. We do have a very diverse staff at our school, from the educational assistants that are inside of each classroom at our school to the teachers that are in my school. Question 8. Think about your own assumptions and stereotypes about people from cultures other than yours, or about students whose living situation may be much different from yours. How do assumptions and stereotypes block you from responding thoughtfully and respectfully towards others? This is something that I definitely am actively developing and practicing in order for myself to be definitely appropriate when dealing with sensitive issues and sensitive topics. I think when you are dealing with situations like that, you do need to be sensitive. Definitely there are skills in working with cultural diverse students, families, communities, and colleagues. I think that in terms of the blocking of stereotypes and the assumptions I have, definitely as an educator, you need to be reflective on what you do and any interaction you have with students, to staff, to any dialogue. and you should always look back and reflect how it was perceived by others. So it's going back to sort of being always engaged in your own learning too. Question 9. To what extent do you engage in the implementation of educational practices and policies that improve instructional practices that effectively serve all students? Well, that's something that currently I do in my role. In my current position as an instructional coach, that's something that I do on a daily basis. And it's all about engaging in the implementation of educational practices and policies that are improving instructional practices, bringing evidence-based practices to teachers in order for them to improve their instruction, looking at specific instructional strategies, looking always at the content, looking at what students need to know, looking at those overarching standards, and then looking at the targets, and then in turn looking at how can we best deliver this to the learners that we have within the walls of our school. Question 10. To what extent do you engage in posing questions, collecting data, analyzing data, posing research-based solutions, facilitating action plans for information, integrated into the larger school structure system to provoke change, policies, procedures, and practices to promote equity for all children? So once again, this is a big part of my job. The majority part of my job as an instructional coach is engaging and posing questions, collecting student data, analyzing, and proposing research-based interventions for all levels of learners. As a member of the school's school improvement team, most schools we call it, they call it the BLT, but here we call it school improvement team, or like our acronym is SIP. That is something that's a district level, and then as a member of SIP, we look school-wide, but then also being an instructional coach, I work closely with the Office of School Improvement, and we look district-wide at the data. What does the data show us? What is it telling us? Really getting in and looking at some data analysis, and figuring out, what are these numbers telling us about the learners that we have in our school and then in our district. Question 11. To what extent do you use disaggregated data to understand more precisely the achievement status of all students and use that information to identify and implement effective instructional practices and policies? Once again, data is a huge responsibility for my work. This is something that I do on a daily, well, not a daily basis, but I do with the PLCs, the professional learning communities within our school. We spend time reviewing the data in order to look at their overarching, depending on what it is that they're teaching at that point in time. Within our PLCs, the teachers have a specific, we call it the 5-step process, and inside of the 5-step process they choose a specific subject that they're going to be really addressing and looking at that particular moment in order to have some concrete dialogue with other professionals and myself. Within the 5-step process, they look at the content standards, they look at the targets of the students, and then with that we always do a pre-assessment to figure out, okay, this is what students need to know, and that gives us an idea of the strengths, the challenges of students, that gives us an idea of any of the misconceptions that students may have based off of prior knowledge. And then it also looks at, well, for us it looks at, are there any specific challenges that we may have within specific students, And then from there, we plan out what are we going to do, how are we going to teach these students. It's that game plan. And then there are formative assessments that go on. Once again, going back to that data, what is that data telling us? Is our instruction solid? Do we need to intervene? Do we need to do some enrichment if students are getting it? How can we best serve the learners in our school based off of those professional learning communities that we have? In addition to that, as the instructional coach at my school, one of the big things that I also do is look at the benchmark data from the NWEA, the MAP testing that we do. The MAP testing is the measures of academic progress. That's something that we are doing in order to map fall, winter, spring, what and how our students are progressing in reading and in math. And that gives us a good idea based off of the RIT score, and that stands for Roush, and that is, the score is equivalent to grade level score, so we know where our students are in the fall, the winter, and in the spring. And then we have some great dialogue together with teachers based off of what that score is telling us. So once again, it's like really rich conversations with staff, really looking at what that that data is telling us. And in fact, we just recently did our data dive for our fall benchmark, and that was one of the conversations we had, myself and the assistant principal and the principal in our school, having the dialogue with teachers. What does this mean? What implications are there based off of that score with that student? What can we do in the learning environment? How can we intervene to best serve the needs of each and every student in our school? So it was definitely great conversations, because it was looking at assessing student, that result based off of their map, and then is there some sort of since we're low numbers, we can really be low numbers, meaning there's only 66 students in our school. Most of the teachers only have 10 is the maximum, and most teachers typically have anywhere from 6 to 8 students in their room. So based off of the results from that mapped fall benchmark score, they can really do some great intervention and intervening, making it really prescriptive and individualized to that student's needs.